Go ahead and get started. Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Allison Weiss, and I'm the Associate Director of Corporate and Executive Education at the Brown School of Professional Studies, which you can see in this beautiful slide. We are so excited that you have chosen to join us today for this incredible masterclass on unlocking problem solving. And we hope that we at the School of Professional Studies can actually be your partner in helping you to unlock all of your leadership challenges that you're facing now and in the future. So I'm going to very briefly give you an overview of the School of Professional Studies before I hand things over to our incredible faculty lead who is here to lead the session. The mission of the School of Professional Studies is to empower you with the skills, resources, and networks that you need to change the way the world works for good. Every year, Gallup does an employee engagement survey, and every year they find a really alarming statistic. This year, they discovered that 70% of the US workforce is not engaged at work, which is incredibly alarming because a lot of us spend over 50% of our waking lives at work. So we know there's this huge gap between what our needs are at work and how current leadership approaches are or are not meeting those needs. And so the mission of the School of Professional Studies is to help you build the skills and the confidence that you need to become the leaders that we need to lead the world into the future in a more inclusive, productive, healthy, and engaged way. And thank you, each of you, for being here today and taking that first step by being here at this free masterclass to start to learn those skills. If you'd like to deepen your learning, and we hope you do, we hope you'll choose us to partner on that journey as well to help you become more competitive for your own career and also to help future-proof your teams and organizations. And we offer many different paths towards that goal. First of all, we have about 17 non-degree programs that range in size from certificate offerings to short courses to free masterclasses like we are doing today that are in topics including leadership skills, applied diversity, equity, and inclusion skills, coaching, and applied AI and data science. And that portfolio is always growing. So there'll be new topics announced shortly. In addition, we have 30 early career master's programs in a whole host of different topics. And we offer 3 professional master's programs with low residency requirements, and our executive MBA program, our master in healthcare leadership, and our master in technology leadership. All 3 of these offerings are offered as many different types of formats, so they'll fit into your busy lifestyle and your busy career. So you can take things in person, online, or a mix of the two. We offer our topics kind of cluster into 3 main categories: leadership, healthcare, and data and technology. And at the intersection, we can also build custom programming for you and your organization if you're looking to have a custom offering for a full group. We cater to you at every stage of your career. So whether you are early career, mid-career, or a senior level, we are here to help support you and help you meet your goals. And we can offer a flexible delivery format that includes online, in-person, and also some asynchronous content where you can access it on your own time in demand. And you have the opportunity to influence the future of our portfolio. At the end of today's session, after Ed has given us a taste of what it would be like to be in the School of Professional Studies classroom, I will come back on and I'll have a poll to ask you what you would like to see in the future of our programming. So we'll have a couple of exciting opportunities for you to influence the future of our portfolio. So with that, I am really pleased to introduce and hand things over to our absolutely incredible faculty lead, Ed Barrows, who's a professor of the practice in leadership. You can see his full bio here, so I'll only read some of it, but he is absolutely incredible. Ed has worked with leaders at all levels in the areas of strategy, strategic leadership, and leadership development for the past 25 years. He's an International Coaching Federation certified coach and a member of Harvard's Institute for Coaching. Prior to joining Brown, Ed worked as a managing director at Duke Corporate Education, where he was responsible for designing and delivering programs for a portfolio of global clients. And before Duke, he worked in a variety of professional service positions with Deloitte, General Electric, PwC, and Palladium Group, where he was vice president and leader of the executive education organization. He's also written books, including one that we're going to talk about quite a bit today and that I've learned a lot from. And we are just very, very lucky to have you here and teaching us, Ed. So welcome, Ed, and thank you all for being here. Oh, and two last housekeeping notes. We are recording today's session.
Yes.
We will send you the slides afterwards. I know that's something a lot of people ask about, and we will send you both the recording and the slides afterwards. And if you have a question at any point today, please don't wait until the end. Please submit your question via the Q&A box. And the Q&A box you can find by clicking on your bottom bar of Zoom, clicking Q&A and typing and submitting your question there. We have a lot of people on today's webinar, which is really exciting. And by sending all of your questions to the Q&A, that's going to allow me to keep an eye on it throughout. And then I'll be able to ask the most frequently asked questions and group questions and just answer your questions as efficiently as possible. So with that, I'll turn things over to you, Ed. Welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Allison. Good to see everybody. Hope you are doing well today. So to my friends who are on, hi, nice to see you. To the folks who are new, or rather to my students, some of whom are on, hi, Teddy, and others, good to see you. And for folks that are new, it's great to have you here for the first time. So I thank you for that undeserved introduction, Allison, although I'm going to probably play that for my kids here shortly. So I want to jump into a few things around unlocking problem solving, but before I do, let me make sure we sort of set this up. I won't spend much time on it. Allison's done a wonderful job introing this. We'll talk about this webinar series, Let's Talk Core Leadership Skills and Lessons in Leadership, and then we'll get into a quick refresher and then some stuff that you can have that will help you if you're interested in your teams. And then we'll spend the bulk of today talking about problem solving and some next steps for you. So as Allison was pointing out, we have a lot of good information on our website. So please join in the conversation. This is a screenshot of the things we're working on. We have this Let's Talk Core Leadership Skills session. If you missed last month's on strategic thinking, you can listen to the replay. We have this month's, and you can see executive presence and enhancing your executive presence skills is coming up next month. We'll be going every month throughout the entire 12 skills journey. But we got stuff on healthcare, climate, all kinds of interesting things. So check back off. And also, we have a ad hoc email that we send out right now, which is going to turn into a newsletter here shortly. We put together an article on our provost, actually, Frank Doyle, really interesting, not about his academic leadership, which is extensive, and his research skills, which are impressive, but about how he rode the wave, so to speak, of soccer from coaching his two daughters all the way up to becoming an NCAA Division I soccer coach. Certainly an achiever in the biggest sense of the word, but there's some really interesting leadership lessons. So be on the lookout for that too. And then we have some other things coming up after that. I think all of which is designed to help you manage the world of work today. So the question around skills we've talked about before, and we'll continue. We talked about strategic thinking last month. This month, we're focusing on problem solving. And my colleague, Laura Downing, and I think she's on the call, had a boss years ago that used to say, there's two kinds of companies out there, companies that have problems and companies that are going to have problems. So the idea is that, you know, we all acknowledge that in certain settings, professionally and obviously personally too, we're facing problems that we need to solve. And we're going to talk today about why this is part of the overall set of key leadership skills. In addition to problem solving, we want to make sure we talk about next month executive presence. Messaging is really communication in the written and oral form. So how do we craft impactful, meaningful messages that we're sending in a written format versus when we're speaking? But both of those are included. We'll talk about how to build relationships at work. There's some techniques that I think in the spirit of all these things you can apply pretty quickly. We'll talk about talent development. How do you build the talent of your teams as well as your own? Team building, collaboration beyond the boundaries of your own organizations and teams. Change management, influence, and persuasion. How do we execute effectively? And then to sum it up, what does a high-performing organization look like? How do we think about that and prepare ourselves, our teams, and our culture for that? And then it all starts with self-awareness, which, if you remember from last time, this is the model that we're using. It's got 6 areas that are sort of tensions. You know, we set strategy, then we reap results, we communicate, which drives change, we develop talent, which enables effective teams. So in the strategy slice, so to speak, of the dartboard, we've talked about strategic thinking last time, and then we'll talk about problem solving today. And interestingly enough, problem solving is often tied to strategy, and we'll spend some time thinking about that today, this idea of how do we change our organization to become more competitive, but it can be done and thought about in lots of different ways. In fact, when I was teaching at Babson years ago, Allison mentioned that the strategy group actually looked at a lot of what we did from the lens of problem solving. You know, how do we increase profitability? How do we drive growth? What do we do with a certain business? So you'll see that theme running through today's presentation, but each of the skills we'll talk about throughout the balance of the year. So when it comes to getting some resources, there is on the website, the 12 Skills website, which you'll see the link down there. These are all the things that are available. There is a workbook on problem solving that's free. If you just go and put your email in, you can download that, and you can download the strategic thinking one as well if you don't have that. You can use it on your own or with your teams. It's yours to have to go along with the companion book if you want it. So please grab that stuff. It's made for you. I highly encourage you to work through this stuff. It's applied in its origins. The thinking was if you can work through this on your own or with your teams, you'll be stronger. But the workbooks will be made available every month, and we'll leave them on the website for you to access. So if you have any trouble, just let us know. So why are we talking about problem solving? Why is this one of the 12 skills? I solve problems every day, Professor Barrows. I don't need another course on problem solving. I've been doing this for years. Why would I need to spend any time on this? Well, let's hold back our thinking for a minute. If this is a adaptation of what we showed last month, but markets are changing pretty dramatically. They're more volatile and dynamic than ever. Organizations, you on your teams where you work, and we focus on healthcare, in addition to technology here, which are two of the most turbulent industries in addition to our Brown IE MBA. But there's a lot of ambiguity, uncertainty that's out there that problem solving and having a structured process to do that can help with. I don't really need to spend a lot of time talking about the impact of technology, AI in the workforce. It's changing not only the way we work, but how we work with people, and integrating technology and digital processes as well. Structurally, the workforce is changing. I just was reading an article today, I think it was either in Bloomberg or New York Times or Wall Street Journal, on people are working longer and people are planning on not stopping work at all. My brother actually just sold the company he had for many, many years. I think it was like 30 years. And now he's starting to think about, what am I going to do next? So even when you quote unquote retire, and I got another text from someone today, I hadn't talked to about 10 years, said, I guess I really never retired. So I think the notion is people are working in different ways longer. People are coming to the workforce with more of a skills focus versus a degree focus. So the demands on the workforce and you as leaders are increasing. We're being asked to do more with less, which is increasing the demands on people operationally and from a manager standpoint. It's hard to supervise if you can't delegate and follow up on things. You can't do everything yourself. I'm sure many of you know that. And then organizations are going through all kinds of transformational activities. It's hard to manage the workplace today, especially at a time when organizations have to keep adapting. So problems are really a challenge. And you say, but again, Ed, I've been really good at problem solving in the past. And if you're good at it, great. But I think you'll see here that there's a lot of, I'll call it, literature is probably a strong word, but there's a lot of thinking that exists on this. So stop guessing. I'm not picking these books for any other reason than I'm familiar with them. I'm not suggesting they're good or bad, but my sense is they are, in a couple of them I am familiar with. So stop guessing. One of the biggest challenges we're trying to confront today. The Bulletproof Problem Solving is from McKinsey authors. It came out a few years ago. It's got a 7-step methodology in there. I'm not particularly familiar with it, but they'll generally have some of the same steps. Thomas Vettel-Eddlesborg, we highlight him in the 12 skills book that we have. He's great. He has an interesting bit on problem reframing that we'll talk about. And then this book from McKinsey, some of you probably have it or have seen it. It's not from McKinsey, actually. It's from authors who are familiar with their work. Essentially, you could see in the subtitle there, understanding and implementing the problem-solving tools and management techniques of top strategy consultants. So you tend to see a lot of this work being done with these top-tier consulting firms. And it sort of begs the question, well, why is that the case? Why are we spending our time here? So I thought this was kind of interesting, and it's highly anecdotal, but I put in problem solving in some of the top tier consulting firms, and this came up. It's from Boston Consulting Group site. And you're probably saying, Ed, I don't want to be a consultant. I never dreamed of being one. Fair enough. But what's interesting about the top tier consulting firms, and I think in general in the organizations, is there's a constant need for people who know how to solve not simple problems, but really complex problems. So if you look down at the bottom, if you're getting hired into one of these organizations, they want you to showcase what you know about problem solving. They want you, if you've even got some expertise, to do it in a more in-depth way and demonstrate your skills. And then even if you're at a senior executive level, they want you to come in, and I thought this is particularly apt for our discussion, with frameworks and strategies that you use to solve problems. And that's really what we're going to talk about today, is giving you a simple framework that you can use. Again, Laura, my co-author, and I have sort of distilled down the best thinking that we could come across to give you something that was streamlined. Now, if some of you use a process already, great. We're not here to undo that. If you don't use a process, which at some level you probably do, whether you think about it deliberately or not, we're here to get you to sort of test and think about that. But suffice it to say, a lot of money and energy is spent by firms trying to find people and teams who can solve complex business problems. If you're someone that has these skills, you're in a position to be more valuable, not just to your organization, but to yourself. So even if you're in the startup world or thinking about doing that, it's useful to have these kind of problem-solving abilities. So what we want to talk about today is really think about and explore and examine new and novel ways to approach not just problems that I have, but my team has. And I would really encourage you to think about problem solving as a team sport. One of the things we talk about as being important skill of leaders today is talent development. All of the things that we're presenting to you over these series and beyond just the core leadership skills are intended to enable you to build your and your team's capabilities. So think about that way. This is a mechanism to enhance your critical thinking, to look at poorly or ill-defined issues and formulate a structured approach to thinking critically about them. And then also using a process that, when you think back to if you ever took the ACT or SAT or any type of standardized test, gives you a means of increasing your odds. If you remember the test taking strategy, if you look at the question and, you're not sure about the answer, right? You try to eliminate the obvious odd or incorrect choices, and then you kind of distill it down to one or two, and then you make a selection. But, that's a very rudimentary way of solving a problem, an immediate problem if you're a test taker. But we can apply that kind of structured thinking in a more broad-based way, even on some complex business problems, and they can get complex pretty quickly. And then at the end of the day, really strengthening your ability and your colleagues' ability to solve your organization's most pressing challenges. So that's what we're really trying to do today. All right. So it wouldn't be fair to start this without some type of test that gives you a sense, and I'm asking you to be honest here, and please put it in the chat. I've got the chat up. So this is cut and pasted, obviously, right out of our book. But how well are you doing today? So 0 is not very good. 3 is actually very good in these 4 questions. Do you take the time to analyze your problems? Do you break them down into sort of drivers or root causes? Do you look at those and study those right in the appropriate setting? And then do you come up with a choice around actions to follow through? Give yourself a score from 0 to 12. I'd love to see people being honest and putting in the chat. We're not here to sort of make anyone feel bad or good per se, but just to get a sense for where do you think you're doing a good job? Where do you think you can improve? And overall, how would you? Now, interestingly, a solid 6, thanks, Danielle. Thomas Vettel-Wettelsborg, he has in his work, where he interviewed, I think, top leaders. I don't know how many he talked to. He said 85% of the executives he spoke to when he was doing his work for What's Your Problem, said 85% think that their organizations are not very good, or their top teams are not very good at problem solving. So I see some 8s, I see some 10s, I see 12, very good. I see some people in the lower end. Wherever you are, that's fine. The intent here isn't to, like I said, make you feel bad or good. The intent is to try to dial in and tap into your knowledge and enhance that with some of these approaches. A lot of people in that middle area, so that's fine. So the idea as we go through the balance of our discussion today is really think about it. And I encourage you, I think people were great about this the last time, if you were here last time, share any ideas, or if you have some tips. It's just not a one-way discussion despite the forum. Feel free to put those in the chat if you see somebody, if you have a question. By all means, we want to crowdsource that if we can. So now that you've got some baseline sense, Victor, honest, not on all problems. And I think Victor brings up a really important point. I'm not suggesting, I don't think anyone would, that you have to, Ariel, take care, that you have to apply this every time you have a problem. It's a problem going to lunch sometimes, agreeing with your colleagues what you're going to eat for that day. This may be a little too structured for that. This is something where, and if you think about some of Daniel Kahneman's work, it's kind of the type of system or problem where you have to step back, and it's not something you're necessarily familiar with. So you want to approach it in a more structured way. That's when we'll use this. So it begs the question, and we want to start with a basic definition. What's a problem? Most of us come at this question of what's a problem with a bit of an emotional feel. I'm frustrated, I can't do something. But when it comes to problems and problem solving, it's really thinking about, what is the problem? How can I think about the problem in different ways? How do I think about what's causing a certain outcome? Are there options or choices? And then is there some type of process or what I would like to call structured thinking? It goes back to that book that said, stop guessing. If you're someone that has a tendency to guess at problems, the idea is to answer the question around how can we approach problems in a more structured way, in particular around problems that are new or novel to us. So the way I like to think about a problem, there's lots of definitions, but I think you'll get at the similar sort of substance of them is this idea of a problem is a variance between your current state and your desired state, right? It's a problem that's really around some type of performance gap that you want to close. I'm here, I want to be there. And the challenge that we're really specifically trying to address with this discussion and the work that we put in on problem solving is, unfortunately, leaders sometimes approach their problems in haphazard, unstructured, really kind of guesswork ways, as opposed to thinking through some of and trying to identify what the root cause may be. Now, if you're someone that's done any black belt or quality type of training, you've got some of this methodology, if not in part, in full, perhaps. And that's good. You've got a structured way of thinking about it and approach. Yeah, code was certainly a large problem. And a lot of uncertainties. I remember watching TV on the news, and we have Dr. Jha literally across the street here, was on every night, if many of you saw him. How do we think about a problem? I remember somebody said to me, I don't think this was very early on when we started getting into the pandemic. I don't think this is going to be a big problem. And I remember saying, I'm not sure anyone who thinks that understands how exponents work. Because what we ended up seeing was a problem that became very significant very quickly. And the idea is, how do we think about things in that way? And there's plenty of evidence, if you go back to the Spanish flu and other pandemics and epidemics that are informative, and that actually gets into this discussion a bit. But ask yourself honestly, how many times have you solved a problem without a significant problem without going through this process? Could be your kid in school, if he or she isn't doing well. It could be around a challenge you're facing at work. Could be around hiring or keeping somebody. I've seen this, but we don't always do, the thinking, to Laura's point, and as managers, oftentimes we prize confidence, right? We prize taking action. We don't want to hear, I don't know the answer to that, I'll try to figure it out. That sounds kind of weak-minded, when in fact it's the best way to approach a problem that you don't necessarily know the answer to, using a structured way. So let's do a quick experiment, or I should say exercise. And again, please put this in the chat. Now, most of us, when we think about great problem solvers or critical thinkers, we think about the Aristotles and the great logicians out of the Greek era. George Washington Carver, the great inventors. Einstein, who is literally attributed to about a third of the quotes that you find on the internet. I'm not sure he said a third of those things. Maybe he did. I'm not sure. Or Arit Gadeesh, the chairman of Bain and Company. But there's great problem solvers that we sort of herald and hold up on a pedestal for good reason. But there's also people that we know in our own organizations or have worked with in the past that are great at problem solving too. So think about one of those people that you've come across in your own professional life or personal life. And I'd love to see your own perspective of what is it, and Danielle's already jumping the gun, so thank you. What is it that they do that you believe enhances their ability to be really effective at problem solving? Okay, so again, best leaders that Danielle's worked with, always good listeners, ensure they understand the actual problem. That almost sounds like a stupid point that she's making. Like, why would you have to understand the actual problem? That's actually one of the biggest challenges to doing problem solving. Well, she's right, hit the nail on the head, is you solve the wrong problem, or you try to solve something that doesn't need to be solved. So they have some faith in the people that they've hired. Betty, good point. Jabari, yours went by quickly. Sorry, I missed it. A lot of good listening to the different perspectives, thinking before you respond. Yeah, having a good attitude can be really helpful. Discerning between, potential causes and the actual problem. Innovation owners. Symptoms and root causes are not the same thing. This is very true. And you can spend a lot of time addressing symptoms and never get to that concept of the root cause, or just pushing your own solution. So these are great. These are all on point. Nicole, thanks for a list there. So oftentimes we have a sense of what constitutes somebody who is a good problem solver. But then the question is, do we encourage those ourselves and with our team? Do we actually think about that? Yeah, you run thought experiments or think holistically. Thanks, Mauricio. But it's not as if we have no benchmarks for what good problem solving looks like. So let's go through our simple process that we've applied. And again, this is what Laura and I have come up with, but there's other processes, and I'll talk about why that's important. So the first step is thinking about the problem and defining it as clearly as you can. That's what got talked about right at the outset here. And think about an alternate framing. And if you're not familiar with that concept, we'll talk about that. Once you've defined that problem as best you can and feel comfortable with the particular problem that you're trying to solve, breaking it down into a set of root causes or drivers, and we show you a methodology you can use. Then analyzing each of those as carefully or methodically as possible to really work through what a potential cause actually is. We have to have this kind of cause and effect thinking, and then choosing an action. So we call it the D2A2, and all of the 12 skills have a process, a short process methodology associated with them that you can follow. All work in every organization, believe it or not, gets done through a process, whether it's formal or not. And our job is to try to make sure you can have a process back to that point from BCG and a framework that you can use. And then you want to take action. So the first step here is defining the problem, thinking about it in as clear terms as possible. And you can use something, as some of you have seen, this is called a problem solving template or a SCQA template. And it sets up situation, complication, question, and then you see the answer at the bottom. And I also threw in this idea of an analysis just to make sure you understand that once you get to your question, you want to do some type of analysis. Now, I have over here is this I call it the common approach. How many of you have been guilty of this? And you don't have to put it in the chat. An employee brings you or a colleague brings you a situation, and I think about it as a parent, like, hey, Dad, I didn't do well on a test today. Or somebody brings you, the employee's not performing to the level they should be at. And you say, you know what, now that you've given me all that background information, here's what we need to do. Here's the answer. I can tell you what the answer is why you're doing poorly in school. You stay up too late at night. And that's obviously what's happening. We skip the work in the middle, which is trying to really understand the complexities or challenges or the complications around the issue and what's making it an issue. That's actually important. And then developing a question that's going to focus our effort in identifying what we're trying to solve for, doing the analysis, and then coming up with quote unquote the answer. And that's hard sometimes as managers. We have oftentimes a disinclination to do that because it feels like, well, I'm getting paid to have the answer. And a lot of times we do have the answer. But again, back to situations that are more intracted than others, we want to be structured it. Now, I put up a post today on LinkedIn, and we have a 12 skills group in LinkedIn. If you're interested in joining where we post this stuff, there's a post today on what's called plunging in bias. It's not that well known, but most of us are guilty of this at one time or another. And here's some colleagues, a couple of them I worked with, Jonathan and Gaurav at Babson. It said, really the way to think about this is at first avoiding this plunging in problem, which is starting to solve the problem before you really understand it. And that can be, if you can't get the problem defined properly to begin with, it's going to be very hard to come up with a solution given some of the constraints you have. So the idea is to not only use in a template like this, and some of you have other templates and that's fine, but to literally work by yourself or with your team, which is better, to think about what's the situation. Is there a complication that's causing the issue or the challenge we need to address? What's the question or the problem we're trying to solve for specifically as possible to focus our effort? And then we go through the process of thinking about how to solve it. But this alone helps us offset plunging in bias, which is one of the challenges that many managers face. Now, the idea is we want to start to think about how to potentially reframe the challenge that we're facing. So you see here, I have a little graphic on the side about an elevator. So one of the things that Thomas Vettelsborg uses in his training, I think is a great opportunity, is this notion of you live in an apartment building. Some of us have at some point, or a dormitory that's large. And there's an elevator or elevator banks in the building, and the residents are complaining that the elevator is too slow, and they're getting frustrated. They're waiting a long time for the elevator. They bring it to the building manager, and she says, "Okay, what's the issue? I'm waiting. I have to get to work in the morning. I'm waiting a tremendous amount of time for the elevator." So let's just throw it out to you, and please put it in the chat. What are some of the things that you would propose that the building manager do to solve this problem? Not to analyze it. We're going to talk about that. But what are some of the common ways that people think, here's how I would address the slow elevator problem? What are some of the things you think the building manager might be inclined to do? Hang a mirror in the lobby. Add another elevator. That's right. What else? Remember, the complaint is that the elevator is slow. Take the stairs. All right. Someone who's out, you'll get a couple of Christopher, a couple of different values out of that. You get some exercise too. So before you go to the solutioning, which we call it, the ask some questions, get a technician in, right? Yeah, the technician there. Maybe the elevator hasn't been serviced in a while. Play some music. Maybe the mechanisms or the sensors in the elevator. Maybe it's just maybe it is a slow elevator, right? You know, it could be the case that the elevator is actually slow. What's causing you to think it? But as you can see, take the elevator yourself. Well, that would be a way to test it, right, Dustin? So there's different ways to conceive what the challenge is. Now, if I like the free coffee and snacks, Jabari. So if it's the case that the residents are frustrated for whatever reason that the elevator is slow, it may be the case that we're inclined to just say, you know what, it's the motor in the elevator. You could ask the people to be patient. Absolutely. I mean, it looks like depending on how you approach this particular problem, you can end up trying to solve it in a bunch of different ways. One of the things that you can think through before you hire an engineer is reframing the problem, saying, what is the actual problem? It goes back to that, like understanding it. So the way to reframe a problem, we talk about this in the book and the workbook too, is have people sit down, and this is good to do when you're filling out the problem solving template, is say, what's the issue? Is there another way of looking at this issue? So people are saying the elevator slowed. Some of you have done this and saying, you know, it's not necessarily the elevator speed. There's some other things on the periphery. You can bring in outsiders who don't necessarily have a sort of embedded perspective or live in the building or have experienced this type of challenge before. Have people write a written statement like we talked about a minute ago. You know, have them put their definitions in writing. Ask it as you're looking at a problem. Someone said they in the chat, we look at a lot of different viewpoints. Consider different views. What's missing from the definition, or what's missing from what we're talking about with respect to this problem? Can you put the problem into some different categories? Are there potential groups of causes? If it's a business problem, it would be like HR or IT. Are there situations when the problem didn't occur? And then are there different goals? When we think about a problem, maybe it isn't a problem after all if we have a different goal. So, you know, you might say that declining sales is bad in an organization, or that's a quote unquote problem. But if you're trying to wind down an organization's performance, it might not necessarily be bad. I've actually had someone say that to me in a workshop once, a senior leader. So there's definitely different ways to approach the problem. Your framing really matters up front. So the framing of the problem around the elevator is too slow or the sensor isn't working misses out on that situation, that complication that we talked about. So here's a couple of better examples. You know, tenants in the building are concerned that the elevator, given its age, is too slow. They're spending a lot of time waiting for the elevator, especially during peak times of day. So this tends to focus on usage times and the age of the elevator, right? Another example, which is kind of a reframing, says the elevator is actually not stopping on certain floors initially that are calling for it. So maybe it's a programming issue. The residents note that there's several stops that are happening before it gets to where it's being called to in the first place. So there's nuanced differences in how people experience the problem, and it really underscores how important it is to define the problem carefully up front, and to think about a definition that gives it the right framing for the situation. So the point here is you can create different framings that give you a different perspective and a different opportunity to think about how do we want to approach the problem. But going through the definition point and the initial framing is important to get ourselves understanding what the challenge is that we're facing. Now, once you've done that and you've got an issue, so you can see the actual question, are the tenants waiting too long for the elevator? And this is what's called an issue tree. You'll see it as a problem-solving tree. It can be a decision tree, a logic tree. There's lots of different discussions, or I would say ways of describing what this is. But essentially, it's taking a challenge or an issue, in this case, are the tenants waiting too long for the elevator, and decomposing it into what I often call drivers or major causes or groups. So we're saying the tenants seem like they're waiting too long for the elevator. What could be causing that? So it's highlighted here what the major groupings are. And oftentimes you phrase these as questions. So is there an issue with the elevator? And then you break it into subordinate causes, such as maybe the elevator is not functioning properly. Maybe it's just, it is functioning properly, but it's slow relative to other elevators. Someone put this in the chat too. Maybe it's around the capacity, the lift capacity for the entire building. Maybe the building itself doesn't have the sufficient numbers of elevators. It's back to the, I'm waiting a long time for the elevator during peak times. Maybe there's some issue with the tenants. Maybe too many people are riding the elevators. The recommendation about taking the stairs is a very good one. Or trying to, balance out the times of day that people use the elevator. And then also maybe they're just not very engaged as they're waiting. So the point here of doing the issue tree, these are hypotheses. That's a good question at this point in time. You don't know what the issue is, but you're trying to figure out what the potential, what we call mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive, MISI list of causes will be. So this is a snapshot of that, but with your team, you work through and group them so that you have all of the things that are potentially causes of this challenge. That's the collectively exhaustive. And the identification of what I'll call the drivers or the causes are broken into categories such that they're mutually exclusive, meaning they're all distinct and different, but the solution is collectively in there. The question that you're trying to address is in there. You will collect data, you'll see here in the next slide, to test these. So the idea is when I look at the issue, which is, are the tenants waiting too long? I'm trying to figure out where is the potential problem, because the issue was posed as the elevator's too slow. But it looks like when I reframe the issue, it was around wait time. So that's why it's important to actually agree with a group of folks, or at least think through, if you're doing it individually, what the potential question is you're trying to address. So once you've created your problem tree or your issue tree, and you feel comfortable that you've got all of the potential causes of the long wait times for tenants in there, now you can start going through and ruling out causes. Now, you might say, well, this seems like a lot of work. Well, it's not something that you would necessarily do for every problem that you face. Ones that are simpler, you wouldn't do this. But let's say, and the example I like to give aside from the elevators, let's say you go to the doctor for your physical. You're taking your annual or biannual physical, or whatever it is. The doctor asks you how you're feeling, and you say to the doctor, I feel pretty good, except that every now and then when I exercise, I get this like pressure in my chest. It's kind of weird. It's fairly recent. Over the last several months, I get this kind of like pressure, and I feel, it's uncomfortable. And so the doctor says, interesting. So she turns to the computer behind her. She starts typing some things in, and finally turns back to you, and you say, what's up? What's next? And the doctor says, I've seen this plenty of times. I've seen this plenty of times before. I've scheduled you in a month for open heart surgery, because 9 times out of 10, it's an issue with one of the valves. I think you might be inclined to say, don't you want to run some tests? Don't you want to do something that gives us a sense of where we are today? And maybe there's some things we could rule out. I mean, that seems like a silly example, but I literally was talking to somebody yesterday and I saw a note that they got from a doctor that said, we're going to go through the process of ruling things out. It's called evidence-based medicine, right? You don't want your doctor to schedule surgery. You want your doctor to run some tests and go through the process of, is it anxiety? Is it your diet? Is it something that's genetic? Is it something that's actually a defect? Is it something that's come on lately? Has to do with your recovery or exercise? There's also that approach in management, and it's called evidence-based management. And that's what this is. It gets us to think through this mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive set of potential causes for the challenge we're facing. So the medical illustration is actually a little more on point. The elevator illustration is intended to be a little bit humorous for us today. But once you figure out this range of potential causes, now you can go through and start figuring out, okay, I'm going to actually collect data around each one of these, right? I'm going to actually think about, is the elevator functioning properly? So I might call that engineer in and say, yeah, we checked it. It's actually working fine. Okay. Is it slow relative to newer elevators or elevators that are the same age? No, it's about the same speed. Do we have enough elevators in the building? Well, when we looked at the building lift capacity relative to what's expected by the city or the town, it's actually fine. Are too many people using it? We looked at some patterns of use during peak times and non-peak times, and it actually seems about okay. It looks like that it has to do with tenants and them not being engaged during their wait time, right? That's what it appears to be. So the idea is we're ruling out the causes, back to the medical example, that aren't in fact causing this issue around whether or not tenants are waiting too long. And then once we've gotten to that point, then we can start thinking about, all right, if that's what we believe is the most likely cause, we can start thinking about the options or the choices that we have in terms of what to do next. What's the action we're going to take now that we've done the decomposition and the analysis? So as some of you pointed out very astutely, you could install TV monitors, right? That's an idea, but you want to have some criteria by which you'd evaluate whether or not that's a good idea. Well, it could be very costly. If you've got a large building and a lot of different elevators, it could be high cost and you've got to have them all wired in. It could take not too long, but you're essentially saying there'd be a high impact in terms of the potential payoff for the dissatisfaction the tenants are facing, but it's going to take some time to do that. It might be too costly. You might decide to install an audio system, both in the elevators, elevator music, of course, and outside the elevators on the floor so that people at least are engaged in maybe some news or some easy listening or whatever it is. That probably is going to take some time too, maybe even longer since you're installing it on the elevators. And that might be costly as well. And that might not have the high payoff that you want because people don't necessarily like elevator music. You could put up mirrors, and you saw the other things. You could put snacks out there. Doing nothing is an option. Some folks said, like, yeah, just tell people they need to take the stairs or whatever. Now that may not be a good option. It's a good wellness option, as Dolores points out. But that, oftentimes people forget that doing nothing is oftentimes an option when it comes to doing this. So the idea here is you want people to think through not only a systematic and structured way to get to the decisions, but then use a set of criteria to evaluate, I'll say, the goodness or the usefulness of each of the decisions. And then ultimately make a decision that's circumspect relative to what the issue is you're trying to address, in this case, the wait time. Now, you may end up telling them, hey, everybody take the stairs. That may have an impact on your satisfaction of your property and how it gets listed on apartments.com. But ultimately, you're going to make a decision based on looking at this. So it looks like a lot of work, and it can take a little time to do this, to be fair. But around more complex and sophisticated decisions, you want to use a team of people and you want to think through it. And it's a great way, again, to get people into the mindset of structuring decisions. Because what you find is if you use this kind of approach or methodology, even for simpler decisions, people will start using this kind of approach. What are the potential causes? What are the potential drivers? Is there anything that we've missed? What's the most likely or the least likely thing? Can we collect some data and test this, right? It's really an approach that gives us some insights and some thoughts around what's the highest probability around picking the best outcome now that we've isolated what the outcomes and the causes of the outcomes can be. So what did we do here? We put up the mirrors. So most people love to look at their beautiful selves. So as you can see here in our illustration, people feel good now that their mirrors are installed. And then now we can go back and test once that's happened. Are people feeling good about the change? Do they sense that wait time, quote unquote, or their perception of wait time has actually changed relative to what they're experiencing as they wait for the elevator? Now, you may, in your wisdom, pick a different choice, or your team may want a different outcome. But as long as you've worked through a process where you feel reasonably comfortable that you've understood what the problem is and the complexities or challenges around it, you've thought through what the potential causes or drivers of, you've collected enough information or done enough due diligence to sort of test your hypotheses, and it is set up like that. And then you've got some objective criteria by which you can make a well-informed decision. You're at the point now where you can feel better about the outcome that you're going to get to. And then if it doesn't solve your problem, then there may have been something wrong with your logic tree. But the idea is up front, you want to make sure you spend as much time defining the problem as best you can before you get into solutioning. So the OODA loop, as pointed out, the orientation, observation, decision, action loop that was just mentioned, is this notion that the faster you can cycle through a set of observations and then ultimately decisions better than your competitors, it factors in speed. In this case, we're trying to get to the best answer we can relative to the challenges. And then Barbara's suggesting we want to communicate to the tenants that we've best understood the situation as best we can. They may or may not believe you, Barbara. We'll have to find out. So let's just wrap up. I want to set aside some time for questions today. But what we're encouraging you to do is really think about, for your most important and challenging problems, approach it in a structured way. And use these as an opportunity to engage your team in better thinking too, because we know just from the anecdotes that we see up front on the texts and some of the work that's done by our colleagues at large consulting firms, big problems are persistent in organizational life. And people that can solve them are in a great position to add additional value to their organizations. A lot of that has to do with really framing and defining the problem correctly up front. If you don't get that part right, the solutioning that you do is going to be less than effective. You really want to think through using something like a decision tree, what the potential causes are, and try to make sure that you've got all of them grouped into your outcome. You can use the tree to figure out how to do something. The challenge with that is it assumes, if you're using it as how to best fix the elevator, that there is in fact an elevator problem, using that as an illustration. So you want to be careful when you use how do I do something, because it assumes the case, or it's effectively saying that this is something we will approach. We just may look at approaching it in different ways. And then you want to thoughtfully, as you saw in our little matrix there, evaluate your actions and make a decision based on that. So I will ask Allison to come back here in a moment, but just to make a little bit of an announcement for next time, we'll be talking about executive presence next month, which is really a hot topic. I find people in the workplace today really love to talk about how am I showing up? How am I dressing? How am I communicating? How am I getting along with my colleagues? And then after that, in April, we'll be talking about developing clear messaging. Now, if you have any questions on what we talked about today, we will make it available for you. So you can get the slides. I know people always ask, or you just have some questions. If you want to do this in your organization in any way, shape, or form, we're more than happy to help you with that. Or if you just have a few questions, feel free to reach out and ask. So with that, I want to turn it back over to my esteemed colleague, Allison, who's going to field some questions, and we'll see if people have any thoughts on what we shared today.
Thank you so much, Ed. This was absolutely incredible. And thank you to everyone here who engaged so thoughtfully and actively in the chat. That made the session even better and richer because of your insights. So just a reminder that if you have a question, please submit it by clicking on the bottom bar of Zoom and then clicking on the Q&A box and typing and submitting your questions there. But first, we want to give you a little opportunity to partner with us in a strategic problem-solving exercise, which is helping us choose our next offerings in our portfolio. So I have a poll that I'm going to launch now. And in this poll, we are asking you to give us feedback about 3 specific program concepts. So last time we had a poll where we asked you for your top priorities in terms of content areas. From that, we went and engaged with our faculty and put together a couple of options that are more specific. And we would love to hear your feedback on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being that you would never enroll and 5 being that you would definitely enroll. You're ready to click the registration button right now on 3 program concepts. Program concept number 1 would be a course on leadership essentials. This course would be just a 3-hour sessions. So it's very short and quick. It would be a Tuesday, Thursday, Tuesday, and then that's the full course. The course would cover the topics of communication, negotiation, and executive presence, 1 on each of the 3 days. You get 3 hours of communication, 3 hours of negotiation, and 3 hours of executive presence. We would run this from 4:30 to 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Program concept number 2 is a course on branding yourself and your ideas. It would be a 4-week course, some synchronous, some asynchronous. It would be 2.5 hours of work per week with 2 live sessions. And the topics it would cover are unveiling personal values and vision, crafting your professional image, and delivering your message. And we would run this from 5 to 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And then program concept number 3 is a course on AI, artificial intelligence, governance, and ethics. This course would be 4 1.5-hour live sessions offered over 2 weeks. And the 4 modules would be an overview of AI ethics, AI monitoring, auditing, and accountability, understanding AI regulation and legislation, and private sector efforts in AI efforts. So those are the 3 concepts that we are testing out now. And it looks like we have about 60% of the responses in. That's great. Thank you all so much. So I'm going to keep this poll open for another give it like 20 seconds because this does require a little bit more thought. So I'll give you another, about 20 seconds to fill this out. We're at about 10 seconds left. Okay, we're in the final run, so I'm going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much. This is super helpful for us, and we will take your feedback, and it will influence the future of our offerings. So thank you so much for engaging in our problem-solving activity. And now we would love to answer some of your questions. So the first question that I see, Ed, is how do you balance urgency versus following a thoughtful process when trying to solve complex problems quickly?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I would imagine most people struggle with that. In an ideal situation, right? If we look at the entire, the 4-step process, you'd be able to structure the problem, identify, define the problem, identify the drivers, test each of the, drivers or causes or hypotheses, and then make your decision. If you can at least, I would say the more of the process you can do, the better. If you can't go through all the process, using some type of structured way to do the SCQA, and at least go through the parts of the decision tree that you can analyze just kind of from a knowledge-based standpoint, just thinking through the options and choices and defining the problem as clearly as possible. If that's as far as you can get, that's better than usually just saying, here's what we're going to do next. And I think many organizations, teams that I've worked with don't take the time just to do the first step. I think doing that can be in and of itself very, very effective. So I think the point is, given the time you have, you can almost always whiteboard something really quickly. Hey, what's the situation complicated? Do we all agree on this? Like just set up a quick decision tree. That can be just in and of itself very helpful to do if you don't get to the part about the quote unquote hypothesis testing.
Thank you. That's great. Next question is, do you have any tips for managers who work across teams where some team members immediately jump to solving the problem without defining it first?
Which I would imagine is a very common problem. So some of the things that we've done in this webinar you could do. So, okay, that's a great idea, Allison, on your problem. Let's take a minute and everybody, Allison's got her suggested solution. Let's everybody just write down what you think your solution is, or even better, why doesn't everyone write down what you think a full definition of the problem is? So even helping people sort of step back and working with them to think through and sort of show them that there's other ways to reframe the problem, like we did in the elevator example, can be very, very valuable. So it's a very common plunging in bias. That's why we put it up there. But as a manager, you want to try to at least, again, that's why I keep emphasizing, teach your team to step back and hey, let's go through this. Now, it's more fun just to brainstorm and wheel and come up with ideas. The challenge with that is it can waste a ton of time. It can cost a lot of money. You can get to no solution, and then people wonder, like, how come that didn't work? And oftentimes it's because we didn't go through a thoughtful process to get to a potential solution that we felt had the highest likelihood of addressing the challenge that we were facing.
Thank you. Do you have a resource for some of the best questions to ask in a problem-solving event?
That's I would say some of the books, check out the books that we put at the outset. The challenge with that is there are some standard trees, like you'll see Deloitte has a value map. If they've created if you put in Deloitte value map, it comes up with it's literally a wall chart. And a graphic, it's very small. It's got all the things that potentially drive return and profitability in a commercial enterprise. So there are some of those models that exist out there. But oftentimes we face problems that may be somewhat novel or unique. And going through the questions and working with a team can be valuable. But usually there's some benchmarks out there. So it's not necessarily a set of questions per se, But as was asked, or you saw in the BCG, the expert or senior level roles, what model or framework is in your mind? It's kind of like the 4 Ps or the 6 Ps in marketing. It's kind of like the ROI model in financial management. There are certain models that exist, or how do I develop human capital or talent development? Those are the kinds of models that if you use as reference points, you can get some of your best questions from, if that helps.
That does help. Thank you. Can you address how people who are quick problem solvers may, in fact, solve the initial problem only to create a whole different set of problems?
That's probably beyond the ability of me to answer. It is certainly the case that solving, it's kind of the whack-a-mole or the unintended consequences. You can solve one problem and inadvertently create, second or third order effects of that. I think the quick problem solving can be, I don't know if remedied, but you can at least try to address it by asking another set of questions around what might some of the unintended or unforeseen consequences be from this decision, right? You could set up another tree. I'm not using the tree over and over, but what could be a potential outcome of this, right? So we talked about the pandemic at the outset. CVS Health decided to, for a very good reason, start delivering vaccines within the stores. One of the unintended consequences of that is how do we manage the flow of people in the store, right? What's going to happen in the stores? How do we manage, access? So a solution, which was an excellent solution, certainly still persists. The question becomes, how do we manage that kind of solution in the infrastructure we have? What are some of the things that are going to impact our ability to deliver retail sales, our ability to accommodate the traffic flow, our ability to utilize the parking lot? I mean, all of these kinds of questions would have to be worked through, even if it's a quick solution is, let's offer vaccines in the store. Great, but we have to think through what some of the challenges will be that are associated with that.
Thank you. What advice would you give to someone who's not a manager about how they can be proactive problem solvers?
Yeah, the technique, it's a great question. And I think that's, you can use some of the questions and techniques. There's usually nothing stopping you from presenting or putting together a PowerPoint slide or a piece of graph paper or using a whiteboard to say, hey, here's how I'm thinking about this problem. Is this useful? Or, have I missed anything? Or sometimes sharing your work, kind of like show your work, share your work. Sometimes just sharing that information gets people to think about, oh, how come you looked at it like that? Well, I'm just using this tool that I came across in Brown or elsewhere to try to just make sure we haven't missed anything. I don't know what your situation is or anyone's situation, but I don't know if any manager who's a good manager would say, well, I don't want you thinking carefully about this. I think some might say, oh, that's a great way to think about it. And, hopefully that, maybe you missed something here, or that might be something you want to share with your broader team. So I think that's the idea of doing that on your own and then sharing with people, is to see if people are back to that. I've got someone who offers solutions right away to get a sense of, are there ways to get people to think in a more structured way?
Thank you. And we are unfortunately running out of time. This is going to be our last question, which is too bad. It always goes by too fast.
You can always email.
Yeah, I know. But this question is, what are your thoughts on how AI and machine learning will impact decision-making and how it will or won't change the decision-making tools that we talked about today?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'd have to say, I'm probably speculating. It's something that we'll have to find out more of. My experience with AI so far, and this is probably, this is actually great, Allison. We'll have to think about bringing somebody in for one of these events that is actually from our computer science department or school. But to think about, it's a great question, right? Like, what's the impact of AI and machine learning on decision making? Presumably, it will enhance it over time, right? Especially the learning aspect around. But that presupposes that the information that's going in is accurate, it's comprehensive, that we haven't missed anything. And I think so it's a little bit of the, what goes into the decision-making engine and criteria in advance will be ultimately the determinant of how effective it is at the outcome. But that's really something to sort of see evolve over the coming months and probably not even years. But, I think AI will, it's appealing to say, question in, solution out, thanks AI. We may not, and I don't think you're suggesting this, but I think we have a few miles to go before we get to that point.
I agree. Thank you so much, Ed. This was an incredible session. And thank you
Thanks.
to everyone who attended, who participated in the chat, and for your incredible questions. These were thoughtful and interesting questions. We hope that we'll see you at the future lessons in leadership that Ed mentioned, and we will include a link to these in our follow-up email, which will have the recording and the slides as well. And we hope to see you in either our physical or our virtual classroom for one of our programs too. So
Anytime.
thank you
Thanks.
all. Take care. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye-bye.